Let's talk about adjectives. And adjectives are kind of modifier. So a modifier is a word that changes the meaning of other words around it. And adjectives tend to modify two things in particular. They modify, oh, that's a really ugly arrow there. They modify nouns and they modify pronouns. So nouns and pronouns. Now, adjectives also answer a number of questions, and these questions are which, and what kind of, and how much, and how many. All right, so a whole bunch of questions here. Which, what kind of, how much, how many. But in some ways, it's best not just to ask the questions and hope that we can find the adjective in the sentence. Sometimes it's better to actually look at the noun or the pronoun, find those first, and then try to figure out how these adjectives are modifying those particular words. So instead of just asking questions, we want to look at function and see what word in the sentence goes with which. Now, I've used this picture here to illustrate how adjectives work. So we have a number of nouns. Most of them are just car or cars. And in each case, we've tried to find an adjective that can modify or change the meaning of that noun. The first couple are fairly straightforward. So if we want to say, well, how many cars are there? That's one of our questions. Then we can say 3. And if we want to say, what kind of car? We could say, well, the red car. Okay, so both of these first examples are simply answering some of our questions, and they're pretty straightforward kinds of adjectives. But things can get trickier as well, and so most of our attention then is going to be spent on these unusual cases where other parts of speech or larger phrases and clauses can function like adjectives. And that's really where some of the difficulty comes in with adjectives. So in our third example then, we have car show, and you can see that show is the noun, so that part is the noun, and car, so far we've seen car is a noun. In fact, usually it is. But nouns can sometimes function as adjectives. So if you were to say, what kind of show, so that's our question, what kind of show, then you could say, well, it's a car show. And so the word car, even though it's a noun, can function like an adjective. In fact, if I were giving a test to somebody, trying to figure out if they knew their parts of speech, and they answered that car was an adjective or a noun, either one, I would give them full marks. So it doesn't really matter to me which one you say it is, as long as you understand the function in the sentence. Okay, in the fourth place here, we have how the word the is used as an adjective, and the word the is also referred to as an article. So in English we have just a few articles. We have the, and un. And un is just a version of but this time before a vowel. So the articles are not a separate part of speech, but they are classified as adjectives. So watch out for those. Okay, we're going to jump to the top of the second column. We'll come back to the last example in a moment. And in this case, what we have is a pronoun being used as an adjective. All right, so pronouns also can function like adjectives, and we could pick a number of different ones as well. So we could say any car, any car, or that car. Each one changes the meaning of car ever so slightly. We can also use participles as adjectives. So in this case we have used, which is a past participle, and traveling, which is a present participle. So both of these, they're both considered verbals, and verbals can sometimes act like adjectives. Seems kind of weird because they used to be verbs, but they have sort of transformed themselves into adjectives in this case. And that really shows how flexible the English language is. And I really encourage you to think of words as not just being one part of speech all the time. Many of them, of course, are. But parts of speech can often change what they're doing. So a noun can become an adjective, or a pronoun can become an adjective. We also have some larger units that can function like adjectives. So in this case here, we have in the middle, which is a prepositional phrase. It starts with a preposition, and then this whole thing is describing the car. So which car? The car in the middle. And our last example here, the car that is painted green, this is an entire clause. So that is painted green. That's a dependent clause. Cannot stand by itself as a complete unit. So, oops, dependent clause. All right. And it's modifying again car. Which car? The car that is painted green. Okay. Now there's just a couple of things that we want to finish up with here. And the first is that the adjective doesn't always have to be right next to the noun. So if you were to say the car is red, so red is our adjective, then you can see that red is a little bit removed from car. It's not right in front of it. So that's one thing to notice. And then the last thing that we'll notice here, as we try to squeeze in as much information as we can, is that sometimes adjectives can function as other parts of speech as well. This is fairly rare, but you might, for instance, talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And these are adjectives, but you can use them as nouns. So if you say the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's a case of adjectives being used as nouns, which is kind of fitting since so many other parts of speech try to be adjectives. We should at least let the adjectives get to be something else as well. That's it for adjectives. Try the exercises on the website, and before you know it, you'll be able to spot them no problem.